It started like every other quiet Sunday. A man, his boat, and the still mirror of a northern lake. But when Daniel Carter heard a desperate cry echo across the water, he never imagined he'd find himself in a race to save a dying life. A tiny, breathless creature hidden beneath the surface would change everything. What he pulled from the lake that morning wasn't just a bear cub. It was a reason to open his heart again. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications, because this story will prove that even the quietest lives can echo louder than we expect, and that sometimes rescue works both ways. The sun had just begun to climb over the pine trees that edged the glassy waters of Bentside Lake. Daniel Carter sat alone in his boat, the creak of oars and the gentle lapping of water the only sounds that accompanied him. He wasn't in search of fish. Not really. It was the stillness he chased, the peace. He was a man shaped by years of solitude, not bitterness, just a life lived quietly. Ely, Minnesota was a place for people like him. His routine was steady, comforting. But that morning, the silence cracked. A cry, sharp, broken, tore across the lake. Daniel froze. It wasn't human, not fully animal either. A sound of fear, of fading. He scanned the shoreline. Then he saw it. Ripples, wild and chaotic, near the far bank. Something was struggling. The oars hit the water, harder, faster. He reached the edge, heart pounding, and there, limp, wet, barely moving, floated a grizzly cub. His breath caught. The cub's fur clung to its frail body. The lake water was cold this time of year, too cold. With trembling arms, Daniel pulled the tiny bear into his boat. Its eyes were shut, its limbs unresponsive. But as he laid his hand on its chest, he felt it. Faint, but there. A heartbeat. He wrapped it in his jacket, held it close, turned the boat back. The water seemed heavier, slower, as though time had thickened. He whispered, "Hang on, little one. Hold on." The truck roared to life. Dirt kicked up under his tires. Eli's vet clinic wasn't far, but every second felt infinite. Daniel kept glancing to the passenger seat where the bear lay bundled, still and quiet. He wasn't a man who prayed. But that day, he did. The glass doors of the Ely Veterinary Clinic burst open with a jingle that startled everyone inside. Daniel stormed in with the bundle in his arms, his voice tight and urgent. "He's not breathing right. Please, help!" Two techs moved instantly, motioning him toward the back room. A young vet, Dr. Marla Benson, barely in her 30s, appeared from the hallway, already pulling on gloves. "What happened?" "Found him in the lake, barely alive. I think he swallowed water," Daniel replied, breathless. "Put him here." She gestured to the metal table. They unwrapped the soaked fabric, revealing the trembling, soaked cub. His tiny chest rose with struggling effort. His fur was matted and cold to the touch. The staff moved fast. Oxygen mask, suction kit, warm towels, fluid IV. Dr. Benson leaned in with a stethoscope and didn't speak for a few seconds. Then finally, "He's critical, but not gone." Daniel stood against the wall, watching. His jaw clenched. He hadn't realized until now how badly he wanted the cub to survive. Dr. Benson worked methodically, her voice calm but quick. There's fluid in his lungs. We need to clear it. Heart's weak but present. Let's give him a chance." As machines beeped and voices echoed in the sterile space, Daniel stared at the small creature on the table. Its eyes were shut, tiny paws curled in. A life so small, and yet it filled the room. Minutes passed. Then, a gasp. A shudder. The cub's body jolted slightly as air rushed back in. "He's trying to breathe," one of the nurses said. Dr. Benson nodded. "That's it. Stay with me, little guy." Daniel exhaled, not even realizing he'd been holding his breath. 30 minutes later, the cub's vitals had stabilized. He remained unconscious, but the danger was no longer immediate. The vet turned to Daniel. "You got him here just in time. If you'd waited 5 more minutes..." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I couldn't leave him." "You didn't," she said softly. After a round of antibiotics and a warming session under a special heat lamp, the cub stirred. Just a twitch. Then one eye opened, unfocused but alive. Daniel stepped closer. "Hey there, buddy." The cub blinked slowly. For the first time, something passed between them. Not words, not thoughts, but a fragile thread of understanding, one life acknowledging another. Dr. Benson approached with a clipboard. "We'll need to keep him here for a few hours. After that, you can apply to foster him short term. You saved him. That counts for something." Daniel looked at the cub again. "If it helps him heal, I'll do it." She handed him a form. "Then let's get you both ready for that step." Daniel didn't think twice. He signed, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as a man who had opened his life to something unexpected. As the sun lowered behind the trees, he sat beside the kennel, watching the cub sleep. The little one had almost left this world, but Daniel had pulled him back, and neither of them would ever be the same again. By the time the sun rose over Ely the next morning, Daniel's modest log cabin no longer felt like it belonged to just one man. He had cleared a space in his living room the night before, lined with blankets, a soft dog bed, and towels warmed by the fireplace. The tiny grizzly cub, now named Bruno, lay curled in the center, barely moving but breathing steadily. Daniel hadn't slept much, his ears tuned to every rustle, every sigh. He had raised dogs before, nursed a baby raccoon once, but nothing about caring for a bear cub felt familiar. There was no instruction manual for this kind of bond. That morning, as mist rolled off the lake and filtered through the pines, Daniel warmed a bottle of specialized formula the vet had given him. Kneeling beside the cub, he held the nipple close. For a moment, Bruno didn't respond. Then, a weak suckle. A smile tugged at Daniel's face. "That's it, buddy. That's it." Each feeding took time. Each bath, a challenge. But Daniel met it all with quiet determination. When Bruno stumbled during his first attempts to stand, Daniel lowered himself beside him, guiding gently. When the cub cried in confusion at night, Daniel sat nearby and hummed soft, aimless melodies he hadn't sung in years. In the evenings, he wrote notes in a small journal. Fed 6 Oz, walked 5 steps, sneezed 3 times. Tail wag? Is that a tail wag? Neighbors heard, of course. Eli was the kind of town where privacy ended at the edge of curiosity. Some came by out of concern, others just out of wonder. "Is that a bear in your living room?" one asked, half laughing. Daniel would nod. "His name's Bruno." There were skeptics. Some warned him. "He'll grow too fast. He's wild. It's dangerous." Daniel listened. He agreed, but he also knew what he felt. Bruno wasn't just a wild animal. He was a miracle. Wet, shivering, half drowned. Now growing stronger, day by day. That week passed in quiet rhythms. Bottle feedings at dawn. Vet check-ins by phone. Carefully measured playtime in the fenced backyard. And at night, Daniel sat in his old armchair, book in hand, as Bruno snored softly near the hearth. A life had entered his home, but more than that, it had entered his heart. And in that silence between man and cub, something unspoken bloomed. It wasn't just rescue anymore. It was belonging. By the third week, Bruno no longer stumbled. His steps were firmer now, curious, almost bold. Daniel watched in amazement as the cub tottered across the wooden floor, bumping into chairs and sniffing everything like a child discovering the world for the first time. But with every stronger step, an ache started to form in Daniel's chest. He knew this wasn't forever. One morning, after feeding and a gentle brushing session, something Bruno oddly enjoyed, Daniel sat down on the porch with a cup of black coffee. Bruno wandered outside onto the deck, resting his chin on Daniel's boot. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. The kind of quiet that reminded you it couldn't last. That afternoon, the phone rang. Rachel Myers from Bearhead Lake State Park. "Daniel, just checking in. How's our little miracle?" "He's doing well, gaining weight, starting to play." "That's great news," she said warmly. "I wanted to let you know we're ready. Our wildlife transition team has space in the rehabilitation enclosure. If he's stable enough, we can begin preparing him to return." Return. Daniel swallowed the word. Right. Okay. That night, Daniel sat by the fire with Bruno asleep at his feet. He ran a hand over the cub's back, feeling the breath rise and fall beneath thickening fur. The weight in his heart grew heavier. Letting go would be the right thing, but it wouldn't be easy. The next morning, Daniel loaded the truck with Bruno's things: towels, a feeding bottle, the worn blanket Bruno always dragged around like a toy. The cub watched with tilted head and innocent eyes, unaware of the change coming. Daniel made the call. "We'll bring him Saturday." That week was a quiet one. Daniel took Bruno for longer walks, even letting him roam near the trees at the edge of the property. He captured photos: Bruno eating berries, tumbling into a patch of ferns, curled asleep on a bed of pine needles. Each memory, he knew, would have to last. On Friday night, it rained. Bruno curled up closer than usual, as if sensing the goodbye coming. Daniel sat awake longer than he should have, writing in his journal. He's not just an animal. He's part of this home. Saturday arrived gray and cool. Daniel wrapped Bruno in a blanket and set him gently in the passenger seat. As they drove toward the park, Daniel talked quietly. "You're going to a good place, little guy, with space to run, climb, and be who you were born to be. Bruno stared out the window, ears twitching with every sound, oblivious to how hard Daniel gripped the wheel. At the gate, Rachel met them with two handlers. Daniel stepped out and opened the door slowly. Bruno didn't move. He looked at Daniel. Rachel approached gently. "Let's bring him to the intro pen. Let him adjust." Daniel lifted Bruno out, his chest tight. He carried him across the field, setting him inside the gated pen padded with hay. Bruno looked around, confused. Then back at Daniel. A handler closed the door softly. Rachel placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You saved him, and now you're setting him free. That's love too." Daniel nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Take care of him." Bruno let out a soft sound. A whimper? A goodbye? Daniel turned and walked away, each step harder than the last. Back in the truck, he sat for a long time. Sometimes, the right thing hurts the most. The rehabilitation facility was quiet in the early morning hours. Mist rolled across the field where Bruno had been moved after his first few nights in quarantine. The enclosure was larger now, surrounded by trees and natural obstacles meant to mimic the wild. Daniel stood at the fence line, watching. Bruno was pacing, slow, tentative steps, sniffing, exploring, pausing to glance back at the human figure watching him from a distance. Rachel joined Daniel, a clipboard in hand. "He's doing remarkably well, eating solid food, adapting to the new environment. It's textbook progress." Daniel nodded, but the approval in her voice felt like a weight. "He still looks for you," she added quietly. "He sniffs the air when you're near." Daniel didn't respond. The truth was, he didn't know how to say goodbye. He'd saved Bruno's life, but somewhere along the way, Bruno had changed his. Rachel glanced at him. "Would you like to go in one last time?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. A few minutes later, inside the enclosure, Daniel crouched beside a log. Bruno lumbered toward him and nuzzled against his side. Daniel rubbed behind his ear, that same spot Bruno always leaned into. "You're not that trembling little cub anymore," he whispered. Bruno let out a soft huff, settling beside him. Daniel pulled something from his jacket, a carved wooden pendant shaped like a paw. "It's not much," he said, placing it on the ground, "but maybe it'll remind them you were loved." Rachel watched from the gate. The wind rustled through the trees. A red-tailed hawk cried above. Time stood still for just a moment. Daniel finally stood. Bruno rose too, following. Daniel walked to the gate and stopped. He turned back. Bruno watched, ears perked, waiting. But Daniel didn't return. Instead, he whispered, voice catching in his throat, "Live free, Bruno. That's all I ever wanted." Then he walked out. Behind him, Bruno didn't follow. For the first time, he stayed. Back at home, Daniel wandered through the quiet cabin. Every corner reminded him of the past weeks, the towels, the empty food bowls, the faint scent of pine and milk. He sat on the porch, eyes on the lake, its still waters now holding something new, a memory. He didn't cry, not yet. But when he opened the journal that night and saw Bruno's name written a dozen times, the tears came. He let them, because that, too, was part of love. The weeks that followed were quieter than Daniel had expected. Not in sound. The loons still called across the lake at dusk. The breeze still rustled the trees, and the crackle of his fireplace still filled the cabin. But in spirit. The silence now had weight. Each morning he brewed his coffee and sat at the porch like always, but his eyes lingered on the lake longer than before. He still fished, still walked the trails near his cabin, still tended his modest garden. But something in him moved slower. Something was missing. He tried not to dwell on it. Bruno was where he belonged, among his kind, in a place designed for wild things. Daniel told himself that every day. Still, every now and then, he'd catch himself glancing toward the edge of the trees, half expecting a fuzzy shadow to appear with clumsy feet and curious eyes. On one such morning, Rachel called. "Daniel," she said warmly, "I thought you'd like an update." His heart leapt. "He's thriving," she continued. "Fully integrated now. Eats with the group. He's learned to climb, dig, even swim in the deeper stream section. He's happy." Daniel smiled for the first time in days. "Thank you. That means more than I can say." A pause. "He still pauses when he smells anything like firewood or coffee," Rachel added, laughing gently. "He remembers." Later that week, Daniel took his canoe out onto Bentside Lake for the first time in a while. The water, cool and calm, reflected the pines perfectly. He drifted slowly, eyes closed, letting the breeze guide him. Halfway across, he stopped paddling. Something in him stirred. Not sorrow this time, but gratitude. That little heartbeat he'd once held in his arms, it still echoed inside him. Daniel reached for his satchel and pulled out a sketchbook. On the first page was a charcoal drawing. A bear cub curled beneath a blanket, eyes closed in sleep. Below it, in Daniel's careful handwriting, "Bruno, who reminded me that we all belong somewhere." The sun climbed higher. The lake shimmered. And Daniel, alone in his boat, smiled, not because he had forgotten, but because he had remembered it all. The summer gave way to fall, and Bentside Lake began to shift. Leaves turned amber and gold, the wind cooler and the nights long again. Daniel chopped firewood, stocked the pantry, prepared for another Minnesota winter, like he always had. But this year, there was something different in the air. One late October morning, the fog hung low. Daniel stepped out with his coffee, wrapped in his old wool coat, and paused at the edge of the porch. There, just past the tree line, movement. A shadow. His heart stumbled. Out from the mist came a shape he recognized not by sight, but by memory. A young grizzly, larger now, stronger, with fur thicker and eyes sharper. But there was no mistaking him. Bruno. Daniel stepped forward slowly. Bruno. The bear didn't run, didn't growl. He simply watched. Then, like an old friend returning home, he stepped closer, not too close, and let out a low, familiar huff. Daniel smiled, a tear catching in the corner of his eye. "You found your way back." Bruno didn't stay long, just a few minutes. He sniffed the air, gazed around the cabin, and let the silence stretch. Then he turned and disappeared into the trees. And that was enough. It was a visit, a gesture, a message from the wild. Daniel didn't tell anyone. He didn't need to. Some things belong only to those who lived them. That night, he opened his journal and wrote. He remembered. And beneath it, one line more. And I'll remember forever. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who believes in second chances, and help us bring more stories of connection, courage, and compassion to the world. Because sometimes, a single act of kindness can echo through the wilderness and back into your soul. A man forgotten by the world, lost in the fog of Alzheimer's, tied up in the middle of a forest. No one knew he was there. No one was coming. But when a family of wild grizzly bears stumbled across him, what happened next would change everything. This isn't a fairy tale. It's not fiction. It's a story of memory, instinct, and a moment so powerful it brought hardened rescuers to tears. Get ready, because what these bears did will stay with you long after the story ends. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. This story might just restore your faith in what we call wild. The forest was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes with peace, the kind that comes with abandonment. Pine needles cushioned the ground, muting even the breeze. Sunlight filtered in broken shafts through the dense canopy. Somewhere in the distance, a stream murmured past rocks, and in the middle of it all was a man. He was in his 70s, maybe older, thin, pale. His shirt was stained with sweat and dirt, and his arms were scraped raw from rope burns, because he was tied to a tree. His name was Harold Blakely. Or it had been. Some days he remembered. Most days he didn't. Now, as birds chirped overhead, he blinked at the sky with eyes that had once been sharp and blue, now cloudy with confusion and fear. "Where's Helen?" he whispered to no one. His voice was cracked, dry. He tried to move, but the ropes were tight, not cruelly tight, but deliberate. Someone had meant for him to stay here, and whoever had done it was gone. The sun moved slowly across the clearing, marking time in golden rays. Harold drifted in and out of awareness. Sometimes he thought he was back in his childhood backyard, watching his mother hang laundry. Other times, he imagined himself at war, crawling through brush. And once he whispered, "My boy, did you come home?" But no one answered, until the shadows shifted, and something stepped into the clearing. They came silently. First one, then another, a mother grizzly and her 2 cubs. They had been tracking berries along a creek bed when the older cub caught the scent. Human, weak, unfamiliar. The mother paused at the edge of the trees, nose lifted, testing the air. Then she saw him. Harold. Still. Breathing, but not moving. She grunted, low and uncertain. The cubs stayed close to her legs, watching. Harold stirred. He blinked, and for a moment, just a moment, the fog lifted. He saw her. Big, brown, beautiful. He smiled faintly. "Helen," he rasped. The bear tilted her head. She didn't move closer. The next morning, the birds called louder than usual, as if announcing something sacred. Harold was still tied to the tree. His head slumped to the side, chin resting on his chest. The ropes had loosened slightly as he shifted during the night, but they still held him in place. He didn't remember falling asleep. He didn't remember the bears. until he opened his eyes and saw them again. The mother grizzly lay a short distance away in the grass, her body partially curled to shield her two cubs from the wind. One cub nuzzled her belly, the other gnawed lazily on a twig. But they were all watching him. Not hungrily, not fearfully, just present. Harold blinked slowly. "You're not supposed to be here," he said hoarsely. The bears didn't move. His voice was weak, but it carried across the clearing. "Neither am I." At the ranger station 10 miles away, no one was looking for Harold Blakely. Not because they didn't care, but because no one knew he was missing. His son, Derek, had dropped him off for a few hours of fresh air at a rural cabin owned by a family friend. But Derek never returned. Not out of cruelty, out of desperation. Alzheimer's had hollowed his father into someone Derek didn't recognize, and in a moment of weakness, a terrible idea had taken hold. Leave him somewhere quiet, somewhere beautiful, somewhere the disease could finish its work in peace. But nature had other plans. The cubs moved first. One of them approached slowly, sniffing the air, ears twitching. Harold remained still, eyes soft. "Come to take me home," he whispered. The cub stopped just a few feet away and lowered itself to the ground. The mother grunted gently but didn't intervene. Then, slowly, carefully, the cub extended one paw and touched the rope around Harold's leg. A light tap, as if acknowledging it. Harold's eyes filled with tears. The cub didn't flee, didn't attack, just sat, watching. It stayed for nearly 20 minutes before returning to its mother's side. And Harold? He smiled. Not because he was saved, not yet, but because he wasn't alone. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, something had changed. The world had remembered. By the third morning, Harold could barely feel his hands. The circulation in his wrists had slowed. His skin was raw. His breath came in shallow pulls. He hadn't eaten, hadn't moved much, and time no longer made sense. But the bears were still there. They came and went as the light shifted, never leaving the clearing for long. The mother bear remained alert, cautious but unthreatened. She always kept one eye on Harold. It was the younger cub, the one with the darker patch around its left eye, who approached most. And that morning it didn't just approach. It touched him. The moment was quiet. Harold sat with his back still bound to the tree, lips cracked, head hanging low. Then he felt it, not a claw, not a blow, but a nudge. Software instinctive. He blinked, lifting his eyes just enough to see the cub gently pressing its snout against his arm, the way a pup nudges a sibling to wake. Harold didn't flinch. He didn't have the strength to. Instead, he whispered, "That's all right, boy. I'm still here." The cub huffed once and sat down. It stayed that way for a long time, just sitting. Later that day, something even more remarkable happened. Harold slumped sideways in a sudden wave of exhaustion. The rope holding his arm sagged slightly, now visibly frayed from the bark and weather. The mother bear, watching from the tree line, grunted, not a warning, but something softer, and the cub came forward again. This time, it didn't just sit, it pawed gently at the rope, not violently, not playfully, almost intentionally. Scratch, pull, pause. Harold watched through half-closed eyes, not understanding what was real anymore. Then he felt something else. Slack. Just a bit. Not enough to free him, but enough to give him hope. He let out a sound that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. The cub looked up sharply at the noise, then backed away, ears alert. The mother didn't move. Harold whispered, "You clever little thing." He didn't know what the bears were doing. He didn't know if it was luck or memory, or simply nature being kinder than man. But whatever it was working. That night, under a canopy of stars, the bears stayed closer than usual. The search party wasn't looking for Harold Blakely. They were searching for bears. A local wildlife agency had received reports of grizzly activity near hiking trails. An unusual presence, the tip had said. A family of bears behaving strangely, spending too much time in the same clearing. Not hunting, not migrating, just watching something. That caught the attention of Maya Jensen, a senior ranger with a long memory and a sharp instinct for patterns that didn't fit. She went out with a team of 3, 2 tranquilizer rifles, a drone, and an uneasy feeling. Meanwhile, in the clearing, Harold was fading. He hadn't spoken in hours. His wrists were nearly free now, thanks not to tools or blades, but the quiet persistence of claws that never meant to help, but did. The darker cub had returned again, scratching and tugging at the same section of rope each time the mother allowed. Harold, slumped against the tree, managed one phrase when he felt it loosen. "You're doing it." His voice cracked and disappeared on the wind. The cub blinked slowly, then sat back, as if studying the man's face. Then the air changed. The wind shifted. The bears lifted their heads and vanished into the trees. Harold, barely conscious, murmured, "Where'd you go?" But he already knew something was coming. 30 minutes later, Maya found the clearing. She saw the rope first, then the man, then the claw marks in the dirt. Her team froze behind her. "My God," one of them whispered. Harold blinked slowly, confused by the shapes moving around him. "You found me," he muttered. Maya knelt down and checked his pulse. It was weak. His lips were dry, his face blistered. But he was alive. And there was something else. The news broke quietly. A local Oregon paper ran the headline, "Elderly man with Alzheimer's found tied in forest. Survives with help of mysterious wildlife presence." Most readers skimmed it. Another strange forest rescue. Another tragic story. But then came the video. The trail camera Maya Jensen had placed at the edge of the clearing had captured something no one expected. At dawn, 2 days after the rescue, the mother grizzly returned with her cubs. No food, no aggression, just presence. The cub with the dark patch, the same one who had returned to Harold again and again, walked to the spot where the man had been, and sat, right in front of the empty tree, facing the rope, not touching it, not sniffing it, just being there. Then, slowly, the cub pressed a paw into the dirt and dragged it once across the ground. A line, deliberate, then stood and walked away. That was it. 8 seconds. But it went viral. Wild bear returns to check on rescued man. Did this cub remember the man he helped save? Grizzly behavior challenges scientific understanding. Maya was flooded with calls. Biologists, documentarians, skeptics, poets. They all asked the same thing. Do you think he knew what he was doing? And Maya, every time, gave the same answer. I don't know, but I believe he did. At the rehabilitation facility, Harold was improving. He still didn't remember everything. His memory came in waves, names, places, confusion. But there was one thing he never got wrong: the bear. They stayed with me, he told the nurse during breakfast one morning. You mean people? He shook his head. The bears. They didn't leave. Even when I forgot who I was, they didn't. The leaves had started to fall. Autumn painted the forest in gold and rust, and the clearing where Harold had once been tied now looked like any other quiet patch of land, unless you knew what had happened there. Maya returned alone, not to check traps, not to monitor cameras, just to be there. She walked the edges, boots brushing aside old pine cones. The rope had long since been removed. The tree still bore the scar where Harold had leaned, the bark rubbed smooth by human shoulders and rope burn. She stopped and sat, and waited. It had been 3 months since the video had gone viral. The attention was fading, as it always did. The world moved on, but not Maya, and not Harold. He had asked her something during her last visit to the rehab center. If they come back, will you tell them I remember? She hadn't known how to answer, so she came back now, not to speak, but to hope. She sat in the clearing for hours. Nothing moved, until the shadows shifted near dusk. A crackle of leaves, a low breath. She turned slowly. And there, just beyond the tree line, stood the mother grizzly, older now, still powerful, and beside her, the cub, no longer small, nearly grown, taller, leaner, still with that dark patch over one eye. He didn't charge, didn't sniff the air. He walked forward. Maya stayed seated. She didn't reach for her camera. She didn't speak. She just nodded once. And to her amazement, the bear walked to the same place where Harold had once been tied. He looked at the tree, sniffed the bark, then sat, just like before. But this time, spring came late that year. The mountains clung to their snow caps, and the forest took its time unfurling green across the branches. But when it came all at once, with bird song, new buds, and the return of soft earth beneath the trees. Harold Blakely walked again, not quickly, not far, but with purpose. Maya had arranged it, a carefully supervised visit back to the woods. His therapists had protested. His son, after months of guilt and reconciliation, was the one who insisted. He needs this, Derek had said, not for closure, but for clarity. The clearing hadn't changed much. The tree stood the same. The air held the same quiet weight. And Harold stood there, cane in one hand, breath caught in his chest, staring at the ground where the rope had once lain. I thought it was the end, he said softly. Maya stood beside him, quiet. But it was a beginning, he added. He looked up into the forest. Do you think he'll come back again? Maya didn't answer. She didn't need to, because the silence was full of meaning. And then, as if summoned by the stillness, not by sound, a shadow moved between the trees. Harold squinted. A shape. Broad, low, brown. And then, two shapes. A bear, larger now, stepped into the edge of the clearing, and beside him, another cub. Smaller, wobbling, bright-eyed. Harold let out a breath that sounded like a laugh caught in a sob.